There comes a moment when you realize that no matter how much you wish, wait, or pray for your life to change, nothing actually shifts until you do. That moment is both terrifying and empowering, because while it strips away every excuse you've leaned on, it also places the pen of your life back into your hands. You can blame your past. You can point fingers at your upbringing, your financial situation, or the people who hurt you. You can cite all the circumstances that worked against you, and you might be right. You might have had it harder than most. But here's the part: no one tells you the pain may not have been your fault, but the healing, the transformation, the future, that's your responsibility. No one is coming to rescue you. And if they did, you'd still be stuck with the same mind that created the life you're trying to escape. Change is an inside-out job. It doesn't start with a new job, a new relationship, or a bigger paycheck. It begins in the quiet moments when no one is watching, when the lights are off and the world is silent, and you finally decide enough. Enough playing small, enough waiting for signs, enough believing the same old story that keeps you in the same old place. The truth is, no external success will ever outgrow your internal standards. You can upgrade your house, your wardrobe, or your title, but if your mindset is still locked in survival, you'll sabotage everything you build. And make no mistake, this isn't about positive thinking. This is about radical ownership. Ownership of your choices, your energy, your reactions, your growth. Ownership means looking in the mirror and refusing to let circumstances define your ceiling. It's deciding every single day to show up as the person you say you want to be, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's hard. That version of you, the one with unshakable focus, quiet confidence, and relentless discipline, already exists. It's not something you have to become, it's someone you have to uncover. But you won't meet that version by doing what's easy. You'll meet them through sacrifice, through sweat, through choosing growth over comfort, through making the decision that average is no longer acceptable, through understanding that life doesn't give you what you wish for. It gives you what you're willing to fight for. You have to train your mind like a muscle. And just like the body, the mind doesn't grow without resistance. Every time you feel like quitting, that's the exact moment you're being given a choice to fall back into your old identity or to lean forward into a new one. Change begins when you catch those micro moments, when you recognize the old impulse to procrastinate, complain, blame, or shut down, and you interrupt it. When you stop treating growth like a weekend project and start treating it like a way of life. It's not about perfection. It's about awareness. Every step forward starts with seeing where you're at. Really seeing it, not sugarcoating it. Are your habits aligned with the results you want? Are your words empowering or limiting you? Are your standards high enough to support the future you crave? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are the gateway to freedom. Your environment matters, yes. But if your internal environment, your thoughts, your beliefs, your self-talk is polluted, it doesn't matter how beautiful your surroundings are. You'll always find a way to pull yourself back down. That's why change has to start within. It has to begin with an identity shift. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And the most important system of all is how you think. Changing your life requires disrupting your patterns. It requires choosing discipline over dopamine, vision over validation, responsibility over resentment. It requires asking every morning, not, what do I have to do today? But who do I need to be today? Because the future doesn't belong to the smartest, the luckiest, or even the most talented. It belongs to the ones who take charge of their own transformation. Change begins the moment you stop waiting for the world to shift and decide that you are the shift, that you are the turning point, that the version of you who's stuck, tired, frustrated, or lost is not the final draft, that your past isn't your potential, that where you started isn't where you have to stay, and that every limitation, every obstacle, every setback can be fuel for your evolution if you decide to make it so. The most powerful conversations you will ever have are the ones no one else hears. They happen in silence, behind your eyes, echoing in your mind at every critical moment. That inner voice, your internal narrator, is either your greatest weapon or your greatest enemy. And here's the truth most people never confront. It wasn't yours to begin with. That voice was shaped by teachers who misunderstood you, by parents who projected their fears onto you, by friends, media, failure, rejection, and the pain of being told you weren't enough, smart enough, strong enough, worthy enough. Over time, it became automatic. You didn't choose that voice, but you're the only one who can change it. If you listen long enough to negativity, it becomes your reality. Not because it's true, but because belief doesn't require truth to function. It just requires repetition. And repetition, especially when it comes from within, becomes your identity. So when your inner voice constantly whispers things like, "You're not good enough," or "You always mess things up," that's not insight, it's programming. And like any program, it can be rewritten. But you can't change what you don't recognize. The first step is awareness. Notice the voice when it speaks. Where does it show up? In moments of stress, right before you take a risk, when you're about to speak your truth. Start identifying its patterns. That voice isn't just noise. It's a pattern, and patterns can be broken. Once you become aware of it, you take back control. It's not just about silencing the negative voice. That's not enough. You must replace it. You must intentionally speak truth, power, and clarity into your own mind. Your self-talk becomes your self-concept, and your self-concept determines what you think you deserve. That's why people stay stuck. Not because they don't want more, but because deep down they don't believe they're allowed to have more. The mind will always act in alignment with its deepest beliefs. So if you believe you're unworthy, you'll sabotage success. If you believe you're not capable, you won't even start. This is where intentional reprogramming begins. Speak to yourself as if your life depends on it, because it does. Every time you talk to yourself, you're casting a vote for who you are. And over time, those votes accumulate. They become the voice you trust. The mind doesn't know the difference between a lie and the truth. It knows what it hears the most. So you must outvoice the doubt, outvoice the fear, outvoice the old conditioning. But don't confuse this with delusion. This isn't about fake confidence or toxic positivity. It's about speaking to the potential within you, not as if it's a fantasy, but as if it's fact. I am capable. I can figure it out. I deserve peace. These aren't affirmations, they're declarations, and they must be reinforced with action. Because every time you follow through, every time you take a step forward, when your inner voice tells you to stay small, you create evidence. And evidence is the antidote to doubt. The mind is a feedback loop. What you tell it becomes what it searches for. If you say you're a failure, it'll find 10 reasons to agree. If you say you're learning, growing, evolving, it'll find evidence to support that too. That's why intentional language is so critical. Words are not just sounds, they are signals. And your nervous system is always listening. You can literally reshape your emotional baseline by changing how you speak to yourself daily. Reprogramming the inner voice also requires eliminating the sources that feed it. Who are you surrounding yourself with? What are you watching, listening to, absorbing? Every influence is a drop in the well of your subconscious. If you want a new voice, you must build a new environment, internally and externally. You must starve the old narrative and feed the new one. That means catching yourself when you start to spiral and saying, "No, not this time. This story no longer serves me." It means replacing guilt with grace and replacing fear with focus. And remember, reprogramming takes time. You've had that voice for years, maybe decades. It's familiar, and the brain loves familiarity, even when it hurts. That's why growth feels uncomfortable at first. But the more you practice speaking power over your life, the more natural it becomes. The voice that once held you back can be trained to push you forward. The same mind that once said, "You can't," can learn to say, "You will." And eventually, you already are. Every day, consciously or unconsciously, you're making deals with your life. Not the kind signed in ink or sealed in boardrooms, but quiet agreements made in thought, action, and reaction. You're negotiating your standards, your expectations, and your worth by what you choose to tolerate. And the truth is blunt. What you allow is what will continue. What you accept becomes the ceiling you live under, not because that's all that's possible, but because that's all you've decided to live with. Most people don't recognize that their limitations are self-installed. They believe they're trapped by external barriers. Lack of money, lack of time, lack of support. But the real prison is built from within. It's formed when you tell yourself, "This is just how things are," or "It's not that bad," or "Maybe this is the best I can get." That's not realism. That's resignation. And resignation is a slow death. You don't see it happening all at once. It's subtle. 100 tiny compromises that add up to a life far smaller than what you're capable of living. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. If you keep showing up late to your goals, making excuses, tolerating toxic relationships, or dismissing your dreams as unrealistic, you're reinforcing to your subconscious that this is what life is. This is all you deserve. Not because it's true, but because you've stopped challenging it. The moment you normalize dysfunction, limitation, or mediocrity is the moment you close the door on potential. Your environment will always reflect what you're willing to put up with. If you accept chaos, you'll live in it. If you accept disrespect, you'll be surrounded by it. If you accept low effort, low return, and low expectations from yourself or others, then that's exactly what you'll get. And the most dangerous part is that this becomes familiar. You start calling dysfunction normal. You stop noticing the ways you're shrinking, compromising, and contorting yourself to fit into a life that doesn't match your deepest desires. But here's the reality. You don't get what you wish for. You get what you require. People who live with high standards aren't lucky. They're intentional. They've made a decision that certain things are no longer acceptable. Not because they're arrogant or delusional, but because they understand that boundaries are not about control. They're about clarity. Clarity about what matters, what's true, and what's aligned with the life they're building. They've learned to say no to anything that insults their soul. They've learned that the power to elevate their life lies in the power to say, "This is not enough for me anymore." That shift doesn't happen overnight. It starts by observing. Where have you been settling? Where have you been convincing yourself to be grateful for crumbs when deep down you were meant for the table? Where have you lowered your standards so you don't feel the pain of disappointment? And more importantly, where have you forgotten that you have the authority to raise them again? This is not about perfection or unrealistic demands. It's about alignment. It's about choosing to hold yourself to the standard of your future, not the comfort of your past. It's about realizing that your life bends to the level of your discipline, and that discomfort is often the price of freedom. There is a version of you who refuses to keep making excuses, who stops blaming the job, the partner, the childhood, the market, and starts reclaiming the power to redefine what's possible. That version exists on the other side of one decision: to no longer accept less than what aligns with your values, vision, and worth. Every time you enforce a higher standard, you send a message to yourself and to the world that your time, your energy, and your life are valuable. That you are not here to simply cope with what you've been given, but to craft something greater. But this shift requires courage, because when you stop accepting what once felt normal, you'll likely feel friction. People may not understand. You may even feel alone for a while. That's the tax of transformation. Growth always costs comfort, and evolution rarely gets applause in the early stages. Still, there's no freedom in fitting into a life that doesn't reflect who you are becoming. There's no peace in continuing to tolerate what drains you, disrespects you, or distracts you from your purpose. You are not obligated to stay loyal to old limits just because they're familiar. You are not meant to play small to keep things predictable. There is a difference between gratitude and complacency, between patience and passivity, and between endurance and acceptance of things that were never meant to be permanent. Pain is often misunderstood. It's viewed as something to run from, something to numb, something to avoid at all costs. But pain, in its rawest form, is not your enemy. It's a messenger. It doesn't come to destroy you. It comes to expose you, to show you what needs to grow, what needs to be released, what needs to be faced. Pain isn't just an indicator that something is wrong. It's often the signal that something is waking up inside you. When life hits hard, when you lose, when you fail, when your plans fall apart, the instinct is to retreat, to protect yourself, to question your worth. But pain has another purpose. It's the pressure that breaks the shell so you can expand. It's the tension that forces you to either collapse or climb. Most people see pain as punishment, but it's actually preparation. It's the tool that chisels away what's no longer needed so that your true self can be revealed. There is a part of you that can only be activated through adversity, not the parts that smile when everything goes your way, but the parts that endure when everything falls apart. Pain teaches you things comfort never could. It humbles you. It reveals your resilience. It teaches you to listen deeply, to reflect honestly, to rebuild intentionally. You don't learn strength in moments of ease. You learn it when you have every reason to break, but choose to bend. You learn it when you're knocked down and something inside you says, get back up. The difference between the people who grow and the ones who stay stuck isn't whether they experience pain. Everyone does. The difference is what they do with it. Some people wear their pain like a badge of bitterness. Others use it as fuel, not to prove others wrong, but to prove to themselves that they are more than what hurt them. Pain becomes powerful when it's processed, not suppressed. When it's faced with courage rather than masked with distraction. It's easy to see pain as a setback, but in many cases, it's a setup for deeper wisdom, a setup for greater alignment, a setup for the kind of clarity that only comes from the fire. You begin to see what matters and what doesn't. You learn to stop chasing approval and start seeking truth. Pain has a way of stripping away the superficial and forcing you into the real. It removes the masks. It demands authenticity. You won't always understand it while it's happening. Growth rarely makes sense in real time, but later, sometimes years later, you'll look back and realize that the most painful chapters were the ones that reshaped your character. You'll see that What you thought was breaking you was actually rebuilding you into someone wiser, deeper, and stronger. And not stronger in the way the world defines it. Stronger in the way that makes you unshakable, quietly grounded, fiercely aware. You don't grow by avoiding struggle. You grow by embracing it as part of the process. You grow by using pain as a mirror, not to shame yourself, but to understand yourself. Pain reveals where you've been avoiding boundaries, where you've been silencing your needs, where you've been settling. And in that awareness, transformation begins. The scars you carry are not signs of weakness. They're signs that you chose to heal, that you chose to continue, that you didn't let the pain define you. Every scar tells a story, not of defeat, but of survival. Every time you show up after pain, you reclaim power. Every time you love again after betrayal, try again after failure, or speak again after being silenced, you're not just recovering, you're rising. This is the builder's mindset. It sees pain not as the end, but as the entrance to another level of self. It understands that discomfort is the currency of growth. That adversity isn't just a chapter, it's the training ground. That wounds can become wisdom if you choose to learn. It's not about glorifying pain or pretending to enjoy it. It's about respecting it as part of the journey, as the crucible where the old you burns off and the new you begins to take shape. Growth demands discomfort. Strength is born in tension. Evolution requires resistance. And pain, when met with the right perspective, becomes the most honest coach you'll ever have. Not because it tells you who you are, but because it reveals who you could be if you stop running and start listening. There is a moment in everyone's life when the walls they once found comfort and begin to feel suffocating. What once felt safe starts to feel small, not because the world has changed, but because you have. Growth does that. It pulls at the edges of your reality. It tugs at the seams of your identity. It whispers and then it roars. You were made for more. And yet, right at that threshold where expansion begins, the fear of outgrowing your environment, your relationships, your habits, even your old self, tries to pull you back in. That's the tension between the life you've known and the one you're capable of living. And the truth is, expansion is uncomfortable. It disrupts everything. It demands that you let go of the familiar, even when the familiar is painful. It calls you to think differently, speak differently, behave differently. Not in a way that abandons who you are, but in a way that reveals who you've been all along underneath the layers of limitation, fear, and false humility. Expansion is not about arrogance. It's not about walking with your head held high to impress others. It's about standing in the full weight of your potential without apology, because there's a cost to shrinking. Every time you bite your tongue, instead of speaking your truth, every time you dim your light to make others comfortable, every time you second guess your vision to avoid judgment, a piece of your power is surrendered. You weren't meant to live a life filtered through the fear of other people's opinions. You weren't meant to water yourself down just to be accepted. When you expand, you confront resistance, not just from the world, but from within. Your old identity will fight to stay alive. The voice in your head will question, who do you think you are? It will remind you of every failure, every shortcoming, every moment you fell short. But here's the truth that shifts everything. Expansion doesn't require perfection. It requires permission, your own. You don't have to have it all figured out to move forward. You don't need every answer before you begin. You just need to decide that you will no longer be a prisoner of the past. The world around you might not be ready for your expansion, and that's okay. Some people were only meant to walk with the version of you who needed their approval. And when you grow, when you elevate, When you stretch beyond the limits of who you used to be, it threatens the comfort zones of those who refuse to grow with you. But your purpose is not to stay small for their security. Your purpose is to evolve, to inspire by example, to lead with integrity, to rise even if it means rising alone. There's something sacred about deciding that you're done shrinking, that from this point forward, your voice will be heard. Your dreams will be pursued. Your needs will matter. You begin to act from vision instead of validation, from alignment instead of approval. That's when everything changes. Not because your circumstances suddenly shift, but because you do. Your energy, your posture, your presence, all of it begins to reflect the mindset of someone who's no longer negotiating their worth. And yes, expansion brings risk. It brings exposure. You may fail in public. You may be misunderstood. You may be judged. But those are the side effects of a life lived at full volume. Playing small doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees regret. You don't grow by avoiding rejection. You grow by choosing authenticity even when it's uncomfortable. Because the alternative is a life of quiet compliance, a life of almosts and maybes, a life where you're always waiting for permission that was never theirs to give. You are allowed to outgrow people, places, routines, and identities. You're allowed to want more, not out of greed, but out of alignment. Because when you expand, when you step into the life that matches your highest vision, it doesn't just benefit you. It elevates everyone around you. Your courage becomes contagious. Your freedom becomes permission for others to chase their own. You begin to operate from overflow instead of depletion. You start making decisions from faith instead of fear. You lead not by being louder, but by being clearer. Clearer about who you are, what you stand for, and where you're headed. This clarity doesn't come from external success. It comes from the inner knowing that shrinking serves no one, not your family, not your legacy, not your potential. The life you want is already waiting on the other side of your expansion. It is waiting for the day you decide to stop editing yourself, to stop postponing your power, and to stop apologizing for being more than what others expected. You were never meant to live on autopilot. You were meant to wake up, to rise up, with a mind sharp enough to cut through fear and a heart strong enough to stand through storms. Change begins with you, not someday, not when it's easy. Now, because the life you want isn't built by luck or waiting, it's built by becoming someone new. Someone who reprograms the voice in their head until it speaks vision, not doubt. Someone who raises their standards until life has no choice but to rise and meet them. Someone who uses pain not as a reason to stop, but as proof that they're still in the fight. And above all, someone who refuses to shrink back when expansion calls. Because once your mind expands, once you taste clarity, conviction, purpose, you can never go back to who you were. You won't go back. From this moment on, you walk different. You think different. You live different.